What's up, troop? In today's video we are going to dive into the foundation of drum and bass, EDM, electronic music in general, and it is the bass, but specifically below that 60 Hz range, the sub bass. Because if the sub bass isn't there, the track kind of feels like it's sort of off in the ether, floating around. But when you get to a club system or a decent set of monitors, or even just a big home hi-fi system, without the sub bass there, everything feels kind of thin. So in today's video, we are going to dive into having that sub element there, how we can manage it, how we can best integrate it into a track. Can we add it afterwards? Do we need to take it from a sample? Do we have to have it separate all the time? Does it need to be in mono? We're addressing that one first. So I've covered reasons for having the sub bass in mono before in the video up here if you wanted to watch that and go through it. So I'm not going to dive too deep into it. There are reasons to have that below the 60 Hz range summed into mono or as a mono source, however you want to look at doing that. If you're making club music, big subsystems and clubs, I know this from years of experience, are often summed to mono. I've even worked in clubs where they only actually take the left channel out of the mixer and only the left channel goes around the club. So if you've got a sub bass and it's, you know, meshing with something else and it's being summed to mono, you can end up losing a lot of that. If you think of your 5.1 surround system, that below 60 Hz range goes to a single unit speaker, it gets summed to mono there. Again, if you've got conflicting waves, which at this point the waves are huge, like the whole length of this room for a single wave, just a slight bit out of alignment and they can start phasing and cancelling each other out. You can absolutely play around with the idea of having a big wash go over to the left or the right that brings that sub, or sweeping sub and bringing it from one side to the other for a sonic experience, especially if you're working in film. That absolutely happens. You've been in a film where the explosion comes boom off from this side and you feel it come from that direction, but all of that is still in your mind because the very simple fact is the sub frequencies are still coming from that one location and we can't really perceive direction of those sub frequencies. So the safe bet is if you're making electronic music that's going to a club environment or is designed for that purpose, it's a safe bet to keep sort of below 60 Hz, definitely mono compatible, if not summed to mono or a mono source. If you're going to be distributing that music with the likes of DistroKid, which is yearly fee, lets you distribute an unlimited amount of music, people are going to be consuming that in different formats as well, and that can also affect it. You want it to be a consistent playback on any system that they so choose to be using. They might have a massive hi-fi system with a big sub in there and you want it to translate on that as well as you do to the guy listening to your brand new track that you've just released in his headphones that he got with his iPhone. Let's look beyond this being just a sine wave. We've already addressed that as a general rule, below 60 Hz that tends to be your sub. Now, as these fleshy, water retaining human things that we are, we don't actually really hear that frequency very much. We feel it and experience it a lot more than we pick it up with our ears. We feel it in our chest and our guts. When there's a huge whoosh of air, we feel the air move past us. We experience sub, but we also perceive it. See, if we've got harmonics in a track and we can hear those harmonics, our brain tells us that there's a low end sub. This is why earbuds work as well as they do. They don't produce that frequency range, but because it's there, because the harmonic experience is happening throughout the rest of the music, this can absolutely be lost in a low quality MP3, by the way. You still perceive that big sub bass to be there. However, this is one thing we address. If you've got just a clear sine wave and no correlation with that sine wave, so no other harmonic steps to let your ear know it's there, that's when you kind of don't hear it. And that's why things like distortion and the new plugin in Logic, like Chroma Glow, can be really useful to add a little bit of harmonic distortion, which gives a harmonic relationship to that sine wave. And the glow up. Even just for me sitting here, massive difference. One's way more perceivable and feels like a big subby sound, even though we know what just happened. Let's look at this in practice in some of my tracks, because I can show those without getting told off by YouTube. Here, for example, we've got a nice analyzer at the bottom here. I've had to go really detailed, so it moves a little janky, but this way we can see the harmonic relationship. We're going to play a little bit from the intro where there's not really any like sub frequency specifically. There's a whole bunch of noise because we're seeing well below at minus 100 dB on the scale here. But when you notice, whenever there's a harmonic here up in the sub, notice that it's got a relationship, like you can see them here. And that's the reason that it is as audible as it is, because if it was just that sub and then we negated to have anything else there, anything else to have a harmonic relationship to it, it just wouldn't work. So here's one example. I don't know if I ever released this tune, but here we are. Hopefully there you can really focus on the low end and see that the kick's in between the harmonics as well, but it's got the same harmonic relationship, and that's how we're keeping that big weighty sub in there without getting in the way of it. And an even better example, we've got the mix here before it was mastered of Do Right, and you can see them so clearly in the mix and the relationship, and hear how everything translates to having that big weighty sub. So everything there, you can see that relationship happening all below 100 hertz. But when we've got them in, we've got the harmonics coming up here, all the way up into like the 500 region. They're all related together. I'll link any of the tracks below if you want to have a listen through and check them out yourself. Now let's talk the power of separating your bass out or your sub from everything else. There's a couple of reasons to do this, although it isn't 100% essential. The first thing is you've got control of that sub element. It needs to be the loudest thing in the mix for it to be perceivable due to the way we hear in the Fletcher-Munson curve. The lower the frequency down, the higher the volume that needs to be in the mix, which means it takes up a crap load of headroom. If you separate it out, it means you can duck it down, move it, fade it away at key moments when you want other things to take precedent, or if you want to lift the rest of the mix up a bit in level and balance everything out. It gives us room to do that. It also means if it's been separated out, we can do things like sidechain compression to move just that out of the way without affecting everything else. Another general rule that you can do here is to have your kick drum be above that sub-hertz frequency, but sometimes we want a subby weighty kick. But if we've got a kick with a fundamental around the 100 hertz range, that can also be affecting the fundamentals that allow perception of the sub to exist. So we can use that sidechain to help move everything like the fundamentals and duck it out the way for a moment, so we can bring the kick through and then let the sub regain back through with its fundamentals and everything that picks up the ear and weight. This allows us to maintain a good level and a good balance of the sub together. Let's have a look at some examples of that in a track as well. So I've picked here an example for you from a mobile game. I did this way back in 2016. And it was mixed with that intent, and I've grabbed this because it showcases exactly what I've been talking about in great context right here. So this is the main drop and the loop in the track. And there's two fundamental things that make up all of the low ends. We can grab them here. And they're doing exactly the things I've been talking about, which is why I grabbed it. If we open up a Fab Filter here, ooh, Fab Filter 2. So you can literally see what I've got going on. Now, strictly over here, this isn't just sub. It's going all the way up to 400 hertz, but it's got all those fundamental harmonics that lets it stick out from something like a mobile game that's going to be played on iPads and phones, right? And I've got the crossover here at 300 Hertz, leaving about 100 Hertz in the middle, which, if I remember, is right where the snare sits. So it gives it that space at all times. And then as well, the two are being sidechained. Whether or not I did them independently or together, we'll discover in a second. You can see they're both responding exactly the same there, so we could then have done that on the bus as well. But we have the option to, if I so needed, make the sub respond faster or have a longer recovery to keep it suppressed with that kick without affecting the top end of the bass, which is all of this. And as a result, this mix translated really well to those smaller mobile devices and gave the atmosphere for the game that we were after. Now, if you're working from like a sample or a synth that generates that sub, for example, you have things like Serum, which have a sub direct out, you can still separate those out. It's really easy to do it perfectly with an EQ. You set up what's called a crossover point, and this is exactly how a system works that has a sub in it. It has a crossover where at a certain frequency, it fades down and then fades down, and you create a cross with an EQ, just like this. Two things that can make this really stand out. The first thing is compression, when you rejoin everything together. We looked at separating the sub bass out from the bass sounds to give it its own portion of control. We can sidechain it separately, we can do things separately without having to really affect the overall level of our track by having a sub that sits there the whole time. What we'll do is send all the sounds related with that sub off to a bus, and we compress them all together, and this kind of stops it feeling like this sub's off here on its own and the mid bass is here and the high bass is here. They instead all just glue together and they all react and respond as one big sound, which is what we want at the end of the day. Now the other thing is the sub bass doesn't have to be static. It can fall into the same category of being filtered out and wobbled as any other bass to give it loads of feel. And if you do this with a sub bass, you can create a way epic feeling in a track. You'll hear this really a lot in like house music, where the sidechain will hit so hard that the sub will duck out completely and then whomp back in, and bump, whomp back in, over and over. You can experiment with that in your tracks, but the trick is you need to be able to monitor it, or at least understand what's going on in the frequency analyzer for it to work. I really hope the video has been helpful for you. If you've got any further questions, please don't hesitate to leave it in the comments down below. I look forward to seeing you in future videos. Take care.